What to expect. Your baby's brain development in utero. This presentation is to give a basic overview and highlight aspects of how the brain develops in a fetus. Let's first start with some brain basics. The major parts of the brain is comprised of the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and brainstem. The cerebrum is the biggest part of the brain, taking up to 2/3 of the brain's total mass. The cerebrum is divided into a left and right hemisphere. As seen in the figure, it is connected through the corpus callosum, a bundle of fibers. This part of the brain is responsible for the highest levels of human thinking, such as writing and speech. The cerebellum is underneath the cerebrum and behind the brainstem. Although a small part of the brain, it contains nearly half the number of brain cells or neurons. Its main functions relate to coordination and movement. The brainstem connects the cerebrum and the cerebellum to the spinal cord, and it is made up of the midbrain, pons, and medulla. It is in charge of most automatic functions such as your heartbeat, digestion, and sleep cycles. With that covered, we can start with how the brain forms in utero. The ventricular zone is where the brain cells are made for the embryo and fetus in a process called neurogenesis. The beginnings of the cerebral hemispheres are seen as early as the 3rd gestational week. At week 5, the cerebellum starts to develop. Between weeks 6 to 7, the brainstem forms, and the cortical plate, which goes on to form the layers of the cerebrum, is formed by week 7. This figure shows the structure of the embryonic brain. At this stage of development, the brain is in a very preliminary form. It has a long way to go. Around week 7.5 to 8, the first fetal movements can be noticed, although this is not from any control from the brain. At week 8, the vermis, which is part of the cerebellum, and pons start to form. Week 9, the hippocampus can start to be identified, which looks like this fully formed. The hippocampus is thought to play a role in spatial navigation and long-term memory. There's also more general movements. Around week 11 to 13, there is another wave of development for the cerebellum. At week 12 and onwards, the hand-to-head movements start to occur, and around this time, a preliminary fissure in the cerebellum is seen. At gestational week 14, the vermis develops more layers, and the fetus starts to move in a more organized way. A little further along, the primary fissure of the cerebellum is developed. By week 15, the hippocampus is seen as an upright S shape, and myelination begins. Myelination is a process where myelin develops over brain cells, which is an insulating sheath that will allow brain cells to transmit their signals faster. Continuing along, more fissures are developed in the cerebellum, and from weeks 15 to 29, the fibers that will form the corpus callosum, the connection between hemispheres in the cerebrum, starts to develop. This image is the magnetic resonance image of the fetal brain beginnings from week 18 to 24. As seen in week 18, the ventricles are shown, and which are much larger compared to the thinner layer of the brain. But as we go along to week 24, the ventricles decrease in size as the formation of other structures such as the basal ganglia, amygdala, and thalamus. In general, further development of the cerebrum decreases the size of the ventricles. There is a lot of development during this period as the ridges and grooves that we typically see in the brain start to take shape, which is also seen in this figure. Between weeks 20 to 24, the hippocampus continues to further develop and change shape. Meanwhile, myelination occurs in the lower parts of the brain. At week 21, the horizontal fissures of the cerebellum is seen. At week 22, the shape of the vermis and cerebrum has a right shape, but at a much smaller size. At week 24, more grooves are seen while the hippocampus resembles its final shape. At week 26, the functions in the pons, which is in the brainstem, begin to form. These functions include regulation of respiration, sleep, and bladder control. Weeks 26 to 32, the fetus is able to move to all parts of the uterus. 31, the anterior temporal lobe forms, which plays an important role for our long-term memory. From weeks 37 to 38, the mouth movements occur as more connections between controlling the body through the muscular and nervous system is established. This concludes the brain development in the fetus.